I'm Elaine Sims. I'm on the campus of St. Catherine's College at the Hunley Library. And with me today, I have a very familiar face. I've done this show for, I think, 5 years, and you've been on at least 5 to 6 times.
At least.
Dr. David Donathan is part of the faculty here at St. Catherine's College. And what is your position here?
I'm the professor of management, teach most of the upper division management classes, and I academically advise the management majors here on campus.
Okay, so let's talk, first let's address that. What do you do in a management class?
Our degree is set up so that the graduates are qualified for entry-level management positions. And statistics show that about 72% of American businesses intend to hire a business or management graduate in the next 12 months. So there's a huge job opportunity, and we've tailored that degree to talk about general management principles, leadership, human resource management, equal employment opportunity, business law, so that when you go in, you have an extremely broad, although shallow, background in most of the major aspects and functions of management. And the students then are prepared to go in and immediately assume roles as entry-level managers.
Okay, so they say if someone graduated from here and went to Akebono, they would be in the office and they would be working on the infrastructure, part of the infrastructure of the
or they could go in as first-line supervisors.
Okay.
A lot of it, of course,
okay.
Right, it depends on the job.
Okay.
If it's a technical supervisor's position, then no, they're not going to have the technical background in manufacturing. So it's not just office jobs. For example, they could go into retail as a sales department manager. They could go in to work for a larger company as a human resource entry-level specialist type of position. So it's a very well-rounded degree to move into progressively higher levels of management.
Okay. Well, and, you know, we've never clarified that before. So
That's true.
I think some people just don't realize when you're going to major in something exactly what it means.
Right.
And I'm a nurse, so I haven't always picked up on that either. So.
Well, and we have a lot of the health science majors take the Principles of Management class because it does introduce them in their degree program to what you're going to experience in healthcare as you're supervising nurses, aides, CNAs, and other staff.
Yeah, and you could run say a mammography department
Yes.
if you also had a degree in management.
Yes.
Okay, but we're not really here to talk about that. You got to go to China this summer to teach a class.
I did. I had been looking into a program about teaching English as a second language and had applied to go next summer thinking there would be some time to come up to speed. And China's Northwest Agriculture and Forestry University, which is one of the government's largest universities in forestry and agriculture, had a last-minute need for faculty to teach an intermediate spoken English summer camp in order to better prepare graduate students and soon-to-be graduate students in English so they could score well on they use an international English test called IELTS instead of the test of English as a foreign language that we use. But in order to qualify for the Chinese government to pay for them to come study abroad, they're required certain test levels. And the object of the month I was there teaching English was to bring up their functional English skills in reading, writing, speaking, and listening so that they could score higher on the test.
So it's just English 101.
I would say this would be like English 300. It was they were intermediate to advanced. I had graduate students who were had completed master's degrees, and one of my students actually needed to increase her score by 1 level on the exam because she was accepted to a PhD program in the States, but just didn't have that high enough level mastery of English. One of my students had to leave class early because she's now in the graduate program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So I had a lot of advanced speakers.
The purpose of this was that to give them a better English background, because I guess English is actually the secondary language almost all over the world.
Yes.
But will most of these students come to the U.S. or will they go?
Most of them are applying
to the U.S.
Northwest University sends about 400 students a year to study abroad, and they have an almost equal number of foreign students come and study. While I was there, upstairs from my classroom, there was a large contingent of Australian and I believe New Zealand students who were there for some summer training.
So is it going to be in agriculture and forestry? Is that what they will study when they come to this
country? Some of them were
country?
doing plant biology. One of my students was majoring in hydroelectric She actually studied dams, hydroelectric building, effects of ecological effects of damming water up, diverting water, all those sorts of things. So it's a very technical college in terms of the science of agricultural and the science of forestry.
How many were in your class?
I started out with about 24, and by the time the class started, we ended up with 30. It was the only intermediate camp being taught. There was a 3-week basic English class that another faculty was teaching.
Okay. Now, will most of these people, are they learning this technology if they come abroad to take it home to their country? Because, I mean, of course, we hear all the time about the overpopulation and so forth. Are they doing it to take back to China, or do they hope to stay, I guess, go anywhere in the world?
It pretty much depends. Once a lot of the students realized there was an English class being taught, a lot of them would stand in the door and just observe, and a couple of them came by and asked questions. But to answer your question, one of the students had just graduated with his bachelor's in accounting, and he has family in the States, wanted to know if he should come to the States to get his master's in accounting or not. And then we discussed, the same as I would advise a student here, what are your plans, what are your goals? If you come to the U.S. for a graduate degree, it broadens your opportunities to work for an American global company, to go back to China and work for a Chinese company that has global offices in the U.S. And so, you know, we did some academic advising, I guess career counseling at that point.
So his family had immigrated to the United States.
He has an aunt that lives in Ohio and
Okay.
wanted him to come and
Okay.
study his graduate degree so he could visit with her.
I'm sure these are brilliant students.
They're hardworking students. I can't say they're brilliant because I have no access to their grades, but they were extremely hardworking, extremely focused. Every break we had little discussions about things that they needed to know. I had lunch every day with at least 3 or 4 of the students. We just sat and had lunch, and they asked questions, and just to have general conversation to improve their familiarity and comfort with spoken and oral listening skills.
So really they had to come to you because Chinese is just the language is. Did you know any Chinese?
I tried
Did you know
learning
any of the
some.
dialect
There was
before
a 10-hour Chinese language component to the prep work I did. The Chinese language is only written in Chinese characters. It's not like if you go to Europe where they use the Arabic lettering so you can kind of phonetically sound things out. The pronunciations are very, very different than the Indo-European languages. And of course the biggest problem was they didn't want to talk to me in Chinese. They would help me with Chinese and teach me some phrases.
Sure.
But the emphasis was on English. So
And
I
that's
picked
good.
up a little bit, but not as much as I would have liked to.
Yeah, my Spanish teacher in high school, when she walked into the classroom, she never spoke a word of English. But,
Right.
you know, if you do it the right way, it was very enjoyable, Sister Catherine Sienna. There's university. Are there universities 4 years? I mean, I'm really going back basic. Did they go to college for 4 years?
They use more of a British model of education, but of course it's very similar to ours. They do their bachelor's degrees in 4 years, and then they typically will do a 2-year graduate program for their master's. And then the PhD programs are going to vary.
Okay. What was, being in a school of agriculture and forestry, was there one major that you could see that was dominant as far as their desire to you know, of course I'm trying to relate this in some way to the Berry program, you know, the Sustainable Future, was that part of that? Do they talk about that? Is that
The actual college degrees are so in line with many of the Berry principles of small farm, sustainable farming, because that's how the Chinese agricultural industry, if you will, operates. They don't have a lot of huge major mega farms. So, and because of their limited resources, a lot of what they're doing are, for example, in plant genetics. The same thing we're doing here at Alltech, trying to figure out how to improve yield by reducing the cost of production through reduced irrigation, reduced fertilization, reduced chemical use. The one young lady who majored in hydroelectrics because there's a big interest in trying to harness water power for electricity. China's made a huge commitment to reducing pollution. So they look at plant genetics, pretty much the same way we do. They look at agriculture more on a small farm to maybe medium
Sure,
farming
sure.
basis.
We've seen that with our berry
And
scholars.
so what they're doing there is very applicable to a lot of the sustainable issues coming here in the States.
I want to ask about the town you lived in and also about the culture, but it mentions here the ever-changing curriculum. You know, the Chinese people are very progressive, and they're very much in the forefront, really all over the world, as far as education, putting their name in manufacturing. Did you see these people as, I don't know how to say this, did you see they're hungry for education, but they're hungry to improve themselves and also their own country, or do they want to venture out into the whole world? I mean, could you even get, am I making any sense? Could you get a feel for that?
I think a lot of what to me could be like, what is their attitude towards education and its use? And I think it's very similar to what we see here in the States. They're concerned about getting a job after college. Getting to college in and of itself in China is a gold star, because you take what they call the college entrance exam, the CEE. That score determines whether or not you're going to college. If you score high enough and are accepted to college, that score determines to a large part which programs you're able to go into. And the Chinese government then provides you a free education.
I was going to ask you
one
that.
time,
So, okay.
including the dorms, room and board, your tuition.
It's like parents. You get it one
They're
time.
like parents. The interesting difference here is they called this a summer camp. It was a 4-week intensive English training. The students and their families had to pay for this out of their own pockets. This was
Okay.
not funded. So that just shows how much they were, or how serious they were to improve their English. A lot of them do want to go abroad to get their graduate degree so they can come back and, of course, have
Okay.
a better job. One of the students at the cafeteria asked me, and she wasn't even my student, she saw me reading a book, and she came over and said, "We are taught to do one thing at a time so that you can do it very well. Yet I notice you're reading and eating at the same time." And so I
So
said,
they're
"Well, why don't you sit
very
down?" Yeah, she wants to talk. And so I told her, I said, "Well, this is a form of relaxing rather than sit here and just stare at your plate." And we started talking, and one of the questions she asked is, as a young single girl, I'm graduating next year and I have a job opportunity in Shanghai, but my mother and father are very worried about me going to the big city. So we talked about different things culturally. They have the same concerns about the cost of living. Shanghai is very expensive. So you would have a student in Washington County say, "But do I really want to go to work in Chicago where
Sure.
apartment rent
Okay.
is horrible?"
Sure.
So they have the same concerns.
Sure.
They have the same desires to have a better life. A lot of the children are first-generation college students. One of my students' father was disappointed because he had to go to school an extra year in order to raise his score on the CEE, and his scores weren't high enough for him to go to medical school. So his father was disappointed he could only qualify to be a computer programmer.
This approach to education, as far as higher education, is that a relatively, I don't want to say new, but is that, well, it is. Is it relatively new to to China that they're encouraging their young people? I mean, I'm even saying new, I'm going to say 20 years. Is this something that has just really
I don't
taken
think
off?
so. Northwest University is celebrating their 80th year
Okay.
this
Oh,
next year, or
okay.
this year, and they're gearing up for a major celebration. I think that much like the U.S., as their economy has developed, and they're the second or third largest economy in the world now, they've seen a greater need for technology, a greater need for internationally capable business. In Xi'an, which is the large city about an hour away, that's where they build the Chinese rocket motors. So it's a very high-tech area, but at the same time, it's just surrounded by 1,000-year-old culture, which is extremely well preserved. And that's probably one of the big things that you should admire about the Chinese, is that they're not letting progress destroy their history and heritage. But I think in the U.S., if you even read what's going on in Lexington now about tearing down historic buildings because they don't fit in. And so they're very progressive, but they're very heritage-minded, very preservationist minded. In a lot of the cases, they are able to coexist in both spheres very well.
Do you think that the students that you had in your summer class, because their families had to pay for it, did they come from more well-to-do families?
I think some of them were more middle class. I had a couple whose parents were faculty at the college or university. I had one student who came from a different university to come to this summer camp. So I think that the families recognize, and that I think there was a certain amount of financial sacrifice to put the students in.
Sure.
But I think it was interesting.
Well, and it is in this country too, so I mean,
It
really,
is, and the price they paid was about $200, which you say, wow, for a 4-week, but when you look at the scale of economy, that's very expensive,
Sure.
very expensive.
Sure.
But even the attitude that a lot of the students have, they were on summer break while I was there, but you would walk past classrooms and look for the instructor because there were 12, 14 students, but they were coming on campus to study and do extra lab work so that they were preparing for the upcoming semester. And the students that I saw there were just so serious about their education.
Well, you know, and if they have a one-time chance that the government's going to pay for it, I'm sure. Do they go in around when they're 17 or 18 into college, like what they do in this country?
The youngest student I had was 18, and the oldest, we didn't ask ages.
Okay,
But
sure.
she was the youngest student. She had just graduated from high school. Now, in the basic English course that Elizabeth was teaching, she had high school students, and I believe she had one middle school student. So there is a lot of the interest in at an earlier age about mastering English so that they have more opportunities.
In China, we had an exchange student from Yugoslavia once, and when they came out, before they came out of what I would say even their middle school, they pretty much made a decision from that point on what they wanted to do with, what they wanted to major in. Is it the same way in China?
I think the difference in China is that college entrance exam, because that
Before
test
that,
score is going to determine, much
what
like in
you're
Japan.
going into. Interesting.
Right. And they
That's
have some,
interesting.
I don't know if they still do, but when I was in Japan, they had something very similar. You had to test, and it was extremely competitive to get into college.
So what do the highest scores go into? Medicine?
The higher scores go into the fields like medicine. I really don't have a feel. I just know that from talking to Ma Yu Chen that his scores, his father had wanted him to be a doctor. He had gone to like an extra 1-year academy prep for the CEE, but he just couldn't get his scores up, so his scores qualified him for computer technology.
Oh, okay.
Some of the others...
And so they accept that?
They do. I think some of them, like he was a little disappointed, but we talked about a little what that was.
Interesting.
I think they have.
Interesting.
I would assume it's like the ACT, SAT,
Sure,
the GRE. Your different scores are going to qualify you for different things. It's just they use their CE scores more for placement, whereas we use those kinds of test scores for acceptance.
Okay. That's very interesting. I think, just exploring how education is in different parts of the country is very interesting. Of course, China to me is just fascinating. It's so diverse. It's so big. It's so populated, and it's just so worldwide. It's just. What about the town you're in? Let's talk about what it was like to be Chinese for a month.
I actually was in southwest China at a smaller town, according to them, called Yangling. It's a real interesting combination of the very modern Linux. Has an outlet store on one of the streets. Lenovo, the big IBM spinoff for computers, is headquartered in Beijing, so there's a lot of technical industry. And in our town, there were a lot of modern upscale shopping centers, cinemas, but there were also, there was just an incredible small vendor market. It would be akin to our farmers market here, multiplied 350 times. And everything from you can stop and get the screen protector put on your iPhone to buying fresh vegetables. You could go by the watermelon stand and they would cut it open and show you, and then cut it into pieces so you could sit on a little stool and eat the watermelon. Food stuff, clothing. So it was a very interesting combination, sort of like Oriental bazaar markets combined with the very modern shopping.
How did the prices? I mean, well, of course, according to their economy, how did you feel like? Probably to you it was not.
The cost of living is just incredibly low compared to the U.S. For example, when I had lunch in the student cafeteria, I would pay about $1 a day, or a meal, and it was virtually all fresh vegetables, all mostly locally sourced, and it would be a very large lunch because you would go and say, I want this and this and this. Like it was like a food court with different vendors, so you could pick and choose what you wanted. The interesting part is my last day there, some of the students and I went to lunch. And they said, would you mind going to Kentucky Fried Chicken? And it was interesting because I would ask them, when I go downtown, the people look at you, and when you say hello, they look at you and they look like, and they said, that's because you look like the Kentucky Colonel.
Oh.
And I laughed about that. But I thought, okay, if you're trying to make me feel at home. But it was interesting because eating at the Western outlets, and they had Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, Domino's Pizza, Pizza Hut, a lot of those, is a luxury because when you go in, I could eat an average meal for $1 to $2, but when you go into like Kentucky Fried Chicken, the menu is not the Kentucky Fried Chicken menu per se, but it was about 6 to 7 times more expensive than eating at a local eatery.
Really?
Because it was very amazing that they sold their product at stateside prices. It was about $8 or $9 for lunch there.
Gosh.
So for the students, eating at KFC was actually kind of a luxury for them, whereas we take that for granted. And for us to have a luxury, we're going to go to a more upscale
yeah, I mean, you get the
restaurant.
$1 meal and get 3 things. Yeah,
Right.
That's interesting. I have a sister that went over there, took her family because I had a nephew there, and she said to be an American in China, they went to the park or anything, people would stand in line just to talk to them.
I didn't have that issue.
She
I
did
walked
a lot.
around a lot.
Well, and she's tall, and she's blonde, she's gray-headed, she's blonde, she's like me, but still, she said it was like we were celebrities. It was like people just, and they'd stop and look at them as they walked down the street.
I got that a lot.
Yeah. And I guess I'm going to revert in a little bit, but as far as the technology in China, is it comparable to our technology, or is it better? I'm just curious because of the you hear so many different things.
I think I would say it's on par, and I did laugh. For example, the workstation I was using in the classroom was Windows XP, which is about 3 generations behind what we have in the States.
Okay.
But in terms, like I said, in Xi'an, they are producing rocket motors that are launching satellites. They have the high-speed Wi-Fi. They have internet. They have
does everybody have a cell phone?
Cars. Everybody has a cell phone. And,
okay, I just wondered.
Just it's very little difference that I saw between technology there and here.
Do they text as much as the Americans do?
They do, and I had the same problems. On one occasion, I asked them not to use their phone to look words up they didn't know, and so I let them know that it was an American class and I was an American teacher, so I would take their phones and put them in my pocket or put them on the teacher workstation.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are a lot of very similar aspects to that.
Did you live with a host family, or did you?
No, they have, because they have such a large number of international faculty, they have separate apartment buildings and so I lived in the international faculty apartment building.
Interesting. Okay. I know I've jumped all over the place in this, and I apologize to our audience. I think it's just fascinating, and I think, so many of us, so many people will never visit China, and it's just, it's so interesting that you got to go.
There is such a demand for Americans with college degrees to teach English as a second language, and that's actually the program I went. This was professional development because I earned my TEFL certificate. I'm now certified to teach English second language on the American rules through this program, and so there is an awful lot of opportunity to go to China and actually teach, even if it's just teaching English for the summer, and you can take the opportunity to travel to. I had a guided tour every weekend as part of the
to learn that
employment
part
agreement.
of the world. Yeah.
And they would say, well, where do you want to go on Saturday? And I would say, well, let's go here. And then they would provide transportation, English tour guide, and we would go off and do whatever sightseeing I wanted to do. And they were very proud of being able to show off all of like the historic sites.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because my nephew was there. He went everywhere. Taiwan, Vietnam, Cambodia, just he became an amazing chef while he was there, which is quite amazing. Well, I think it's fascinating. I think it's wonderful that you were able to do that. Thank you for sharing with us. I mean, I know a lot of young college people are if they don't know for sure what they're going to do if they want to go to postgraduate work, are doing this. I know of 4 that have done it, and some's only stayed 3 months. I know one that stayed 2 years, and loved it. Of course, the videos of the children with the teacher when they were gotten 5 years old, they all look like dolls.
Do.
They don't even look real. They're so beautiful, and so sweet, But this has been, I didn't know what I was walking into today, and it's wonderful.
Well,
let us know where you go next summer.
Well, actually, we'll put a plug in now. We have a special itinerary we're putting together for spring break to go back to Cuba, and the company calls this tour the Cuban Catholic Pilgrimage. And we'll be attending church services, visiting with seminary students. I believe there are 5 community service projects. And so we've actually started the fundraising to try to help students be able to afford to go to that. And they will get credit on their degree program for, they can get credit for religious studies, internet or global perspectives, stewardship, because it's going to be very focused on the culture in Cuba. And it'll be over spring break.
Because we've talked about that on the show. How many times have you done that? You've done that
if this trip makes, it'll be the 3rd time I've taken students to Cuba. This will be my 4th trip, but the first trip was an orientation.
Well, for anyone that's young that decides to go to China, I say, go for it while you're young. I really admire you for doing this, to go out to a different world, to explore that different world.
But I worked for a gentleman called Chow Wen-jun, who was the assistant director for national studies for the university, and they do everything but handhold you. And they're constantly asking, is everything fine? Do you need anything? Is there anything we can do to make your stay better, more comfortable? They're very, very concerned about the welfare of the foreign faculty. So I think that should take away a lot of the, I don't know what.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
It's very interesting. We learned a lot.
Good.
Learned a lot about every aspect of your trip.
Great. Well, it's always fun to come and talk with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.